I'm standing in front of the, and you are too, in front of the old McLean County Bank Building. And this was, got some squeaks here I gotta get rid of. This was built in 1854. It was the finest business building built. The guy who built it was a guy by the name of Asahel Gridley. Asahel Gridley is an interesting man. Ever see It's a Wonderful Life? Okay, Mr. Potter? Yeah, well, he was, man, Mr. Potter and Asahel Gridley were like that, okay? And he comes down that way. He's probably the most beloved, hated man in Bloomington's history. We love to talk about him. We love to say bad things about him. Some of it's justified. A lot of it is, actually. But, well, here, I'll tell you a story. I met an old woman at the museum. She was in her 90s. This is when we had just moved into the courthouse building and was converting it into a museum. And we just arranged to move the statue of Asahel Gridley from the center of the rotunda down the hall. And so there's a story in the newspaper about that. Next day, this old lady was there, and I figured, well, I'm in for a hiding here. You know, she's from Gridley, and she's going to tell me about what an insult this is. She said, I just want you to know something, mister. And I said, okay, ma'am, what is it you want me to know? She says, I grew up in Gridley. My family's from Gridley. I grew up on a tenant farm that was owned by the Gridleys. And we had a saying in our family. I said, what's that, ma'am? She said, well, Gridley got the corn and we got the cob. So, that's kind of a little bit about that guy. How did he get a bank building? Well, he owned the bank. How do you end up owning a bank? Well, Gridley was in the Illinois Senate in 1850 when the Illinois Senate was involved in setting the route for the new Illinois Central Railroad, in which every other section of land, a section is a square mile of land, so every other square mile of land in a 16-mile wide swath from Cairo, Illinois to Freeport, Illinois, from Effingham, Illinois to Chicago, Illinois, okay? Every other square mile of land, 16 miles wide, okay, was given by the federal government to the railroad to fund bonds that would pay for building the railroad, okay? It's a type of public investment, you know? And it wasn't going to be a public railroad because the Illinois Central Railroad was a half U.S., half foreign-owned corporation. By 1856, it was 100% foreign-owned. It worked, and when you got all that land to sell, what do you need? You need an ace landman. You need somebody who really can sell land, and Gridley could. So he stepped down from Senate, and he became the agent for land sales for McLean and Woodford County for the Illinois Central Railroad. And it's 1 week he made $10,000 in commission. I mean, and that's like $10 million today. I mean, he really did well, you know. He did very, very well. And his ability with that, got the money. What do? Well, start a bank, you know. So we started a bank. And the bank became a center of activity for telegraphy. Masons were on the 3rd floor, so a lot was going on here. Gridley was a Whig, and later a Republican. He was a guy who believed in infrastructure. Railroads were the most advanced technology that people were using, and it really, there's no question of the fact that rail completely changed the face of Illinois. Well, Gridley built with Milwaukee brick. Now, why did he do that? He built his house with Milwaukee brick because he wanted to show that you could bring a dense, heavy construction material from a long distance to build a house. He was demonstrating the power of rail by doing that, plus showing that he had more money than anybody else. When his house was being built, Lincoln was in town and went over to see it going on, and he saw, and it was looking at the scale and the size of it. That place is called the Oaks today. It's just a couple of blocks from here. Lincoln said, Gridley, do you want everybody to hate you? I mean, because there was a jealousy thing there, clearly. Gridley was an intemperate man. like to say he probably was doing a pint of bourbon and about 2 gallons of coffee a day, okay? So we're talking about kind of hyper-caffeinated, slightly loopy, very sharp guy. He was a small man. He stood about 5'2", probably weighed 90 pounds. Very energetic, very motivated, constantly moving. He lost a bet when he was 12 years old from his brother. His brother bet him $1, which was a lot of money back then, that he could not stand still for 5 minutes, and he lost the bet, okay? So, this guy came by this stuff naturally. But he had some habits. One of them was he liked to say what he wanted to say. And as a banker, he knew about credit. And so he would stand out here on the sidewalk, and as people were walking by, he'd say, "Hey, son of a gun, I know how much you owe. You didn't pay that debt to so-and-so. You didn't do this." And so he'd just kind of blabber on like that. And people said, Gridley, Well, he said it to the wrong man. A Yankee entrepreneur by the name of William Flagg. And Flagg said, "I'm not going to put up with this." Now, where Flagg was coming from was that a man's reputation in the pre-internet, pre-mass communication era, your personal reputation on what people were saying about you was extremely valuable. So if somebody was saying something negative about you, it had real serious economic damages. You could really get hurt by that. And so Flagg said, "Heck with it, I'm not putting up with this," and so he sues. And Gridley hires Lincoln. He sends a telegram to Lincoln, says, "Lincoln, come here. I need your help now." So Lincoln takes the case. He goes to jury, goes to trial, jury. And Lincoln has to get him off. So how's he do this? He says to the jury, "Well, everybody knows that Gridley talks that way." Now, what did he mean by that? He meant consider the source. Why should Flagg feel any different about this than anybody else does, because Gridley's always talking that way? And the jury said, yeah, Flagg shouldn't get his feelings hurt because Gridley talks that way. Well, it was pretty good, They couldn't argue the facts, they couldn't argue the law, so he argued the attitude, And it worked. Gridley himself becomes a financial backer of Lincoln's run for the presidency. And he ends up starting a business, coal gasification. So he's the guy who's responsible for creating the gas for the first artificial light we have in the community for houses and for street lamps. Very progressive kind of a thing. He becomes a land investor himself. He does quite well. He and his wife do not get along. It's said that when he died, even before he died, when he was dying, this is the story they tell about him. I guarantee 80% accuracy, okay. The minister of the Episcopal Church comes to him and says, "General, you're dying." He says, "Yeah." He says, "Do you think it's time to make peace with the Lord?" He says, "Make peace with the Lord? Hell, man, I hold the mortgage on your church." Interesting way to say it, So anyway, when he dies, his wife says, "Take him out the back door. I don't want the carpets in the front must." So he goes out that way. Anyway, that's General Asahel Gridley, one of the characters of the community, but truly one of the guys who really does build this community. Jesse Fell was asked 10 years after Gridley died, he was asked about Gridley. Was Gridley honest? And Fell said, Gridley was honest at the law and with the law. And so what do you mean? Think about that. And what it meant was that he was skilled at circumventing the law. That's what it meant. Because that's the definition of a lawyer. It's a man who's skilled at circumventing the law. So when Fell says he was with the law and close to the law, he meant that he knew how to get around it too. Anyway, is that corrupt? I don't know. So somebody else can answer that. So we're going to go now around the corner and look at a site where Lincoln gave some speeches after he failed in his election. We'll talk a little bit about that.